I remember that day like a knife carved into bone. The sun was a white blade over the North African desert, the air so thick it felt ready to split inside my chest. We had been fighting 4 days without rest, or rather, trying to hold out while British and American fire tore us apart, squad by squad. By the end, the rifle in my hands was just dead weight, and my fingers shook from thirst, from hunger, from fear. I don't remember who threw his weapon down first. It might have been me. It might have been Franz, my closest friend since training, the one who swore he'd die before surrendering. But when the shooting stopped and we looked up into a row of black muzzles pointed at our faces, honor wasn't part of the calculus anymore. Only survival. I once imagined I'd die in glory. In that moment, I only wanted to live. They bound our hands and drove us in a line past our own dead. Eyes still open in disbelief, helmets crushed, cloth blackened at the edges, a generation's worth of futures scattered in the sand. I didn't look back. I didn't think of Germany. I counted steps and tried not to cry. That night they penned us in a makeshift enclosure in the desert. American guards ringed the place, smoking and trading jokes like they had just won a Saturday game. We huddled together, filthy, spent, mute. I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because of the sudden emptiness in my head. For 3 years I had been nothing but a soldier. In one afternoon, that ended. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I wasn't anything. I thought of my mother and my little sister in Hamburg. Were they alive? The Allied bombs had chewed through entire neighborhoods. Letters had stopped months ago. The thought that they might be dead while I still breathed made me feel like a traitor. 2 days later, they pushed us aboard a ship under the American flag. Through an interpreter, we were told, "You will be taken far away. You will be safe. No one will kill you if you cooperate." Far away could mean anything. England, Siberia, the moon. I had no strength left to guess. They packed us deep in a dark hold. The air was oil and bodies. You couldn't lie flat without bumping into someone else's ribs. On the first day, men pounded the door and shouted. By the third, the noise was gone, just sighs and the steady thud of waves, like the ocean was lulling us into forgetfulness. On the fourth night, I woke from a dream, home, the old stoop, calling for my mother. She didn't answer, just smoke and broken brick. I cried without sound, and the tears ran into my mouth, as salty as the sea. One morning, the hatch banged open, and light hacked into our eyes. "America," a guard said almost lightly. On the horizon, a line of shore spread out, dark green and impossibly calm. They unloaded us at New Orleans like livestock. People watched from a distance. Some spat, some pointed and laughed. I kept my head down. I was sure they would line us up and shoot us here, on their soil, to make a point. No one shot us. They put us on a train and sent us inland. Through the windows, I saw cotton fields running to the edge of sight, neat wooden houses, children racing the train and waving, even tossing sticks of chewing gum like we were tourists. The peace of it all, the cleanliness, felt unreal, like I had died and arrived in some other world. By the time the train stopped, it was dark. Ahead was a wide compound, ringed in barbed wire, almost 3 meters high, towers lit bright as day, and a heavy iron gate with a sign, "Camp Hearn, Prisoner of War." I froze. I had heard stories, starvation, torture, men worked to death. I thought I was prepared, but when the gate clanged shut behind us, I realized nothing could have prepared me. Not because it was savage, because it was quiet. No one beat us, no one screamed. Just footfalls, insects, and night wind combing through new timber barracks. The quiet didn't comfort me. It terrified me. For the first time, I felt my old world erase itself. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't German. I wasn't anything. I was a shadow behind wire, owned by the people I had been trained to hate. And I didn't yet know that here, behind this wire, I would meet my life again, in the shape of a woman. We walked through the iron gates of Camp Hearn under blinding floodlights, and the heavy clang of the lock slamming shut echoed behind us. That sound, a dry, metallic king, felt like an invisible line being drawn. From that second on, I no longer belonged to the world outside. Those first days were a reel of strange images spliced together like old flickering film. Fresh timber barracks lined up on the baked red Texas earth, barbed wire coiled high like a gray-white scar around the perimeter, and the guard towers, tall, skeletal, unmoving, where American sentries stood like carved statues, their shadows stretched black across the amber sky. Each morning a long, shrill whistle would tear through our sleep. We were herded into formation under a sun already scorching by dawn, while the American guards quietly marked our names, eyes holding no hatred, just the cold detachment of men doing their job. It confused me more than yelling ever could. I'd been trained to believe the enemy would treat me like an animal. But here, they didn't beat us, didn't curse us, didn't even seem to hate us. They simply ignored us. And that indifference felt colder than any hatred could. Breakfast came with eerie regularity, soft white bread, eggs, canned sausages, sometimes even butter and jam. The first time I saw the tray, a dry laugh slipped from me, not out of joy, but something bitter. Back home, children were starving. My mother was probably spending all day in a bomb crater bread line. And here I was, fed like a guest by the very men we had been taught to despise. Some of the younger officers refused to touch the food, their pride intact if nothing else. They whispered this was America's trick, to soften us, make us forget our duty to the fatherland. But I had no duty left to forget. I cleaned my plate, though the first bite felt like swallowing a stone. By day, they sent us outside the wire to work, mostly farm labor, harvesting cotton, pulling weeds, fixing fences. The trucks carried us across fields as wide and dry as dead oceans. The sun scorching our necks, red dust caking our lips and hair. Locals stood at a distance, some waving, some turning away. I kept my head down and worked like a shadow. Each swing of the hoe wasn't to feed anyone, it was just to keep myself from going mad. Because whenever my hands stopped moving, my mind filled with fire, Hamburg burning, letters never delivered, names that might already be gone forever. In the evenings, we returned to camp, filed through communal showers so clean it felt suspicious, then lined up for laundry and fresh uniforms. There was even a tiny library in the center, nothing but English books, but the guards said we could read them if we wanted. Some of the men called it mockery. I saw it as a fragile thread back to being human. I began sounding out simple words, mumbling like a child learning to speak. We had to be back in the barracks by 9 p.m. Lights out. The camp sank into perfect darkness, broken only by crickets and the wind hissing through the barbed wire. And in those nights, lying awake beneath the knot-marked planks, fingers laced to stop them from trembling in the cold, I began to understand the real terror of captivity. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't the fear of beatings. It was the absolute absence of familiar sounds. No knock on my bedroom door from my mother. No church bells, no German, only silence stretching flat and endless like a horizon I would never reach. Some of us were already breaking. One lieutenant who'd been a school teacher in Berlin lay on his bunk, eyes hollow, refusing food. One night I heard a soft creak in the dark, like rope pulled taut. The next morning they carried him out, wrapped in a blanket. No one spoke. From that night on, I feared the dark. I feared the empty places in my mind where memories of my family rose like black floodwater. I started filling them with anything I could find. English books, chess games with bottle caps, even scribbled journal entries no one would ever read but me. Then something strange happened. One afternoon, carrying a toolbox back from the kitchen, I saw a woman cross the yard. She wore a crisp American uniform, brown hair tied back tight, cap brim pulled low. She didn't look at anyone, just strode forward, eyes locked on the clipboard in her hands, her steps sharp, shoulders squared, as if the entire camp was made of ghosts she couldn't see. But just as she passed me, she glanced up. Just once. A fleeting look, as quick as a blink. And I swear, in that instant, the world made a faint sound, like a string inside my chest being plucked. I didn't know who she was, a supervisor, a medic. I didn't dare ask, but that night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of war. I dreamed of a woman walking through the yard, between coils of barbed wire, leaving behind a thin trail of light, like a falling star that vanished too soon. The next morning, when the whistle screamed for roll call, I found myself standing a little straighter, breathing a little deeper. Not because I had grown used to the prison, but because, for the first time since I'd been captured, some small part of me no longer felt completely dead. And I had no idea that fleeting glance would become the quiet storm that would sweep my old world away. By day, Herne rattled with noise, boots thudding across gravel, hammers cracking into wood, the growl of trucks hauling us out to the fields. But when night fell, the camp turned too quiet, the kind of quiet that bordered on frightening. Some nights I lay awake, staring at moonlight splintering through the bars, and felt as if the entire world beyond these fences had drifted away forever. No German sun, no smell of my mother's rye bread toasting in the kitchen, no Sunday church bells tolling across cobblestones. Only crickets, only the wind moaning through the barbed wire and the thud of my heartbeat, heavy and slow, as if counting down the seconds until I disappeared. Loneliness didn't come like a storm. It seeped in, silent, patient, like damp leaking from the barrack walls. At first, I thought I could endure it. I'd survived air raids, run through fields strewn with corpses, slept in bunkers while the sky cracked open above me. I thought silence could not kill me. I was wrong. Silence was worse than any bomb, because silence made you hear yourself. I started hearing voices from the past, my mother calling me to supper, my little sister giggling behind the curtain while we played hide and seek, my friend Klaus screaming, "Run!" During a shelling in Tunis, they came one by one, then all at once, echoing so loud I had to press my palms over my ears like a frightened child. There were 8 men in my barrack. We barely spoke, just muttered obligatory good mornings, then sank back into our separate little worlds, silent and rotting like damp wood. One night I woke and saw Becker, the young lieutenant who had once taught literature in Berlin, sitting upright on his bunk, perfectly still. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, but I could tell he wasn't seeing this place anymore. The next day he didn't go to the fields, didn't eat, didn't speak. 3 days later, they carried him out on a stretcher, wrapped in a blanket. No one said how he died. We just knew. Another voice had vanished forever from our wooden box of a world. Becker's death chilled me to the bone. Not because we were close, but because I knew if I didn't do something, I'd become him, a hollow shell fading to ash. So I began to write. At first, just a few crooked German words scrawled across the cover of an old notebook a guard had tossed aside. I am still alive. Then longer lines. What I ate, how hot the sun burned that day, how I'd seen a sparrow perch on the barbed wire like it didn't care who we were. I didn't write for anyone to read. I wrote to remind myself I still existed. I also studied English every night, mumbling each word like a prayer. Book, sky, freedom, home. I whispered them hundreds of times, as if they were a thin spell, as if saying them might anchor me to something still human, but it didn't stop the nightmares. They returned each night, relentless, merciless. I dreamed of my mother standing in the rubble, dress scorched, calling my name through black smoke. I dreamed of coming home to Hamburg, and finding everyone turning their backs to me, faces white and waxen like mannequins. I dreamed of the arms of dead comrades clawing up from the sand to drag me down. I woke gasping, my back slick with cold sweat, my heart slamming, my throat dry as desert dust. Once, I screamed so loud the guards burst in to check on me. After that, I stopped sleeping at all. I sat in the dark, back against the wall, listening to the breathing of the others, counting each breath like ticks of a clock just to prove they were still alive, and so was I. I began to realize the real fear here wasn't fear of dying. It was fear of being forgotten. Fear of being swallowed by time, erased from the world outside, as if we had never existed. We had no names here, only numbers. I was 2,176. They read it out every morning, and sometimes I wondered, if one day they stopped calling it, would anyone in Germany even know I had disappeared? One afternoon, I was trimming grass by the yard fence when I saw her again, the woman from before. This time, she stood under the shade of the administration porch, speaking with an American officer. A gust of wind tugged loose strands of her brown hair from beneath her cap, and she pushed them back quickly, almost awkwardly, as if she wasn't used to gestures that soft. I tried not to look, but my eyes kept stealing glances, drawn like filings to a magnet. Something about her didn't belong here, not because she was the only woman in a place full of men, but because she seemed alive. Alive in a way that clashed with the rotting world inside me. And in that moment, for the first time in months, I felt something pierce through the fear, something fragile, absurd even, but bright enough to cling to. That night, I didn't sleep, but not because of nightmares, because my mind wouldn't stop replaying the image of her. Walking across the yard, sunlight grazing her cheek, a loose strand of brown hair brushing her neck, her hand clutching a notebook like she carried an entire private world inside it. I didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, didn't know why she chose this job, guarding men who had once been her enemies. I only knew this. In a place built to drain the soul from human beings, her existence was like a scrap of white paper left untouched in a pile of ash. And that night, as moonlight slid across the bars of my window, I opened my notebook and wrote one single line. I want to live long enough to see her again. I saw her for the third time on a sweltering morning while repairing the gutter system behind the kitchen block. The Texas sun crashed down like rain made of fire. Sweat clung to my back like glue. The ground was so hot it shimmered, bending the horizon into a wavering blur. She stepped out of the administration office carrying a stack of papers and a wooden ruler. The hard-brimmed cap shaded half her face, but I recognized that stride instantly, brisk, straight-backed, utterly self-possessed. A few American soldiers nodded to her as she passed. She returned only a quick dip of the head, eyes never leaving the files in her hands. When she stopped near the fence to watch us work, my heart slammed as if someone were pounding a drum inside my ribs. I didn't understand why. Maybe because after months of nothing but gray and steel, her presence was like a sudden drop of color, tiny, but enough to make everything around her seem lit from within. She watched me for a long moment. I was crouched over, tightening a valve with a wrench, sweat dripping from my chin onto my hands like molten lead. I tried to act unaffected, but my fingers went clumsy, almost dropping the tool. Then her voice cut through the heat, soft yet firm, her English clear and slow, as if choosing words I could follow. Careful with the pressure valve. It's old. I froze, glancing up. Her eyes met mine. Amber brown, cool but not empty as I had imagined. Yes, old. I fix, I stammered, scraping my words together from what little English I knew. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but like the first crack in a sheet of ice. She gave a brief nod, then turned and walked on toward the offices. I stood there for several seconds before realizing I hadn't breathed since she looked at me. That afternoon, as we were marched back to the barracks, I saw her again, sitting at a long table in the recreation hall, writing in a thick ledger. An American soldier called across the room, "Hey, Lieutenant Miller!" She lifted her head. I heard the name like a bell ringing inside my skull. Miller. I whispered it to myself over and over that night as I lay on my bunk, like a child savoring his first new word. Miller. The first name I had wanted to remember since entering this place. 2 days later, the real chance came. An American officer needed help reorganizing the tool storage room, and I was chosen. I went with another prisoner named Carl. When the door opened, she was there, sleeves rolled up, hair twisted into a tight bun, checking inventory with a pencil behind her ear. No other Americans were present. She glanced at us, then pointed toward the far shelves. Sort by size. Wrenches, hammers, nails. Her tone wasn't sharp, just clean and precise, like each word had been cut to size with a ruler. "Yes, ma'am," I muttered, bowing my head. Carl started silently, as always, but I kept stealing glances at her. The way she pushed a loose strand of hair off her forehead, the slight tilt of the pencil behind her ear, the way she tapped the notebook with the eraser while thinking. I couldn't explain why such tiny gestures made something ache in my chest. Maybe because in this world, where everything was rigid, mechanical, and dead, she was the only thing still alive. Near the end, when Carl stepped out to fetch another crate, I dropped a heavy hammer onto the floor. The metallic crash rang like a gunshot. She jumped slightly, spinning toward me. I snatched it up, flustered. "Sorry, my mistake." She watched me a moment, then said softly, and for the first time not as a command, "You speak English." "Not bad." I looked up, pulse pounding. "Try." "Every night," I said carefully, picking each word as if crossing a river of stones. "Books. Small words." A brief silence stretched between us. Then she nodded, as if acknowledging some quiet, stubborn truth. "That's good." She stepped closer, opened a drawer, and handed me a thin notebook with a blue cover. "Write your words here," she said. Voice low, her gaze angled just off to the side, as if not wanting to seem too kind. "Keep your mind busy." For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I bowed my head, clutching the book like something sacred. "Danke," I whispered. She didn't ask what it meant. She just nodded once, then turned away. That night, lying in my bunk, I opened the notebook. The first page was pure white, untouched. With a trembling hand, I wrote my first English sentence. "My name is Jakob." The letters sprawled crooked and shaky, but to me they were proof. Proof that I existed. For the first time, I didn't feel like 2176. I was Jakob, and someone, even if only for a heartbeat, had seen me as a person. In the days after, I kept finding excuses to get assigned back to the storage room. She wasn't always there, but when she was, the air itself seemed to change. Lighter, warmer. As if the world wasn't entirely sealed off from me anymore. We still didn't speak much, just a few simple English phrases, a few nods, a few times she quietly corrected my pronunciation. But those fleeting moments were like drops of water sinking into the cracked desert inside me. I didn't dare name what I felt, didn't dare even think it. I knew feelings between a prisoner and a warden were impossible. I knew if anyone found out, it would destroy us both. But still, some nights, when the barracks had gone silent, I lay staring at the ceiling, my fingers tracing the cover of that blue notebook, imagining her reading my shaky words and smiling faintly. And for the first time since being captured, there was something inside me that no longer wanted to die. Ever since the day she gave me the little blue notebook, something inside me began to shift. Not suddenly, not like a spark or a blaze, but slowly, quietly, like a seed forcing its way up through stone. Each night after lights out, I wrote. My handwriting was crooked, my grammar broken, but I didn't care. I wrote about fear, about the nightmares, about the morning whistle, about the night wind slipping through the fence like the sigh of the whole camp. And sometimes I wrote about her. Just a line or two, hidden among descriptions of work, as if writing her name outright would be some great forbidden crime. Every week, I found ways to get assigned to the storage room, just to see her. She rarely spoke, but now and then she corrected my pronunciation or asked softly, "How's the work?" I usually answered with only 1 or 2 words. Then I would replay her question dozens of times in my mind afterward, as if it were a poem I was afraid to forget. One day, while I was sorting boxes of old nails, she asked suddenly, "You have family in Germany?" I froze. No one had asked me that in so long. As if I had no family, no past, only a number stitched onto faded cloth. I swallowed, then said slowly, "Yes. Mother and sister. Hamburg." She nodded without expression, but her hand faltered slightly as she wrote. A moment later, she murmured, "My father, Pearl Harbor. He died." Her voice was quiet, matter-of-fact, and yet it swept through the room like a cold wind, snuffing out every sound. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there. We were enemies. Her father had died because of men like me. And still she stood here, speaking to me without hatred. That was when I realized. She was braver than all of us combined. After that, she began asking me small things, what Hamburg looked like, whether the snow there fell heavy, what Germans ate for Christmas. Each question was a thread tying me back to a world I had believed was gone. I told her about cobblestone streets slick with winter rain, the tiny pastry shops, the giant fir tree that glowed in the town square each December, and about my mother, always waiting on the station platform, her red wool scarf snapping in the wind. When I spoke, she no longer wrote anything down. She just sat with her chin propped on her hand, her eyes quiet but listening. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me like a prisoner. She was looking at me like a person. One afternoon, she walked into the storage room while I was cleaning. No files in her hands, no stiff uniform jacket, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled high, a fine sheen of sweat along her wrists from the stifling heat. "Do you like music?" she asked suddenly. It took me a moment to understand. Then I nodded. She pulled a small radio from her pocket and set it on the table. Static crackled. Then a gentle American jazz tune rose out. Bright trumpet, soft drum beat, the rhythm of a heartbeat. I stood still, feeling as if someone had lifted me out of a deep well into sunlight. I didn't know what the lyrics meant, but the sound was so warm it hurt. She leaned against the wall, eyes half closed, fingers tapping lightly to the beat. And for the first time, her mouth curved. Not cool, not tense, but soft, like war had never touched her. "Beautiful," I whispered, my voice raw. She opened her eyes, glanced at me, half surprised, half amused, then nodded gently. "Music keeps the mind alive," she said. I had no words to answer. I just placed a hand over my chest, where my heart was thrashing like a bird who had been caged too long and just heard spring. After that day, I stopped fearing silence when she was near. We didn't talk much, sometimes only listening to the radio for a few minutes, or her quietly handing me a children's book in English and saying, "Try this." I read aloud, stumbling over each word, mangling them into nonsense. She never laughed at me. She just corrected me gently, her voice softening a little more each time. Once, when I confused feather with father, she burst into a quiet laugh, a small sound, but bright as a silver bell echoing through the gray walls. I found myself laughing too. It felt like snapping an invisible iron bar across my chest. It was the first time I had laughed since being captured. In the nights after, I stopped dreaming of bombs. Instead, I dreamed of Hamburg under snow, and of walking down cobbled streets with her. She wore a small felt hat, hands buried in her coat pockets, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. I said nothing. I just walked beside her, listening to the crunch of our boots over the snow. In the dream, I wasn't a prisoner. I was just Jacob, and she was just Miller. I knew it was dangerous. I knew I wasn't allowed to think of her this way. I knew there was a barbed wire fence between us, invisible but sharp enough to shred us both if we touched it. But the heart doesn't care about rules. The heart only knows how to beat. And every time I saw her, I felt it beating not for survival anymore, but for something larger than survival. One night, I wrote in the blue notebook, the letters crooked but steady. I want to see her smile again. Then I closed the book and held it to my chest like a secret. In the pitch-dark barrack, while 8 men breathed heavily in exhausted sleep, I lay awake staring at the wooden ceiling, my lips shaping something no one could hear. Not a prayer, not a vow, just a small, fragile wish, as fragile as the hope just stirring in my heart, that tomorrow she would walk through that door again. The storm fell on Hearn without warning. The Texas sky collapsed like a sheet of black canvas, wind whipping red dust into thin spires, thunder rolling in like distant artillery. We scrambled, yanking tarps, tying ropes, heaving heavy crates deeper into the storage room. Rain hammered down in sheets so hard, the drops shattered on the concrete like splinters of silver. In that chaos, I saw her. Miller ran across the yard, shirt plastered to her skin, brown hair blown wild beneath her cap, clutching an armful of soaked files. She swiped rain from her face, shoved open the storage door, and drove us inside with one sharp motion. Inside! Now! The door slammed. Rain pounded like stones thrown against the walls. The bare bulb overhead flickered. The wire hummed like an insect caught in a web. Carl fumbled for the storm lamp while I dropped to my knees, wedging crates tight against the door. Miller stood with her back braced to it, her shoulders rising and falling, watching the yard through a little fogged window. The light died. The room drowned in ink. Only rain and breath remained. "Generators down," Carl muttered. A guard yanked the door open just enough to bark, "Come on, let's fix this," and Carl disappeared into the gale. The door thudded shut. Miller and I were alone in the dark, the smell of wet iron and swelling wood mixing with the clean salt of rain, the taste of tears. For a few seconds I didn't move, listening to my own heartbeat punch my ribs. In the blackness, the rain sounded closer, louder, like the roof itself had lowered over our heads. I heard her twist the deadbolt, then the crinkle of wet paper. She was checking the files. "Your hand." Her voice was low, husky from the storm. "You're bleeding." I startled. The inside of my wrist had been sliced by a crate edge while I braced the door. I hadn't felt it until she said it. Her fingers found my wrist in the dark, a touch so light it might have been wind, and yet it set my whole body burning. Her hand was cool and steady, long, dry fingers tracing the cut like they were reading a secret line carved into my skin. "Sit," she said, crisp. "Even now." I sat on the wooden step by the shelving. Drawers rasped, a metal cap snapped open, the sharp sting of alcohol rose between us. "We'll sting," she warned. I nodded, though I knew she couldn't see, and fire flashed up my arm as the swab touched the wound. I clenched my teeth, not from pain but from a shiver that ran the length of my spine. 1, 2, done. Her voice slipped suddenly into German, awkward, unexpected, tender. "Nicht schlimm." A laugh broke quiet in my throat. "You're German," I answered in English. "Bad." "You're English," she replied without missing a beat. "Also bad." We paused a half-breath, then a small laugh escaped us both at once. Outside, the rain raged on. Inside, the dark seemed less hostile. She sank down beside me, back against the shelving, knees drawn up as if to keep in the warmth. I could feel her breathing, deep, steady, the alcohol fading under the scent of rain and damp paper. At that distance, the invisible line between prisoner and warden eased back a step. There were only two people, soaked and tired, listening to the sky tear itself apart. "Why do you do this job?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. I was afraid I'd crossed a line, but she didn't recoil. After a long moment, she spoke so softly her words almost vanished into the rain. "Because it's close to home. Home? Mother's alone. I need the job, and I don't want to leave Texas." Silence stretched, then she added, "Also, I didn't want to hate forever." I turned toward where I thought her face was, though I could see nothing but a shape against deeper dark. "Your father," I said slowly. "Pearl Harbor." She nodded. Cloth brushed faintly. "At first, I wanted to hate every German," she said. "But hate is like this rain. It just keeps falling, falling, and leaves only mud." I swallowed. The word hate dropped between us like a pebble into deep water, ripples widening where we couldn't see. I wanted to tell her I knew what it was to be swept under by something larger than a life. War, orders, the invisible machine that pushes millions along like trash in a flood. But the words I found were dry and rough, crumbling on my tongue. "I'm sorry," I said. "Me too," she answered. Lightning split the sky. A cold blue slash slipped past the doorframe and washed the wall. For an instant, I saw rain purled on her cheek, her eyes wide and fixed on some distant music only she could hear. Then the dark took us back. I thought we would sit like that until Carl returned, but then her hand moved, searching in the dark, finding my wrist again where the bandage lay, resting there, light as a promise. No words. None were needed. I turned my hand, threading my fingers through hers, careful as opening an old book you're afraid to tear. She didn't pull away. I heard her breath catch and then settle into its steady rhythm again. Rules, discipline, consequences. I knew them all. I heard a guard's boots slosh past on the porch, heard the radio in the duty room sputter broken orders, heard the rain like a thick curtain that could hide us or reveal us without warning. But for that moment, the world narrowed to the space between two hands. In that space, I lived. "Thank you," I whispered, afraid to break the spell. "For the book, for music. Thank you," she said, voice lower. "For trying." Trying what? To learn, to live, to refuse the easy path of hate? Maybe all of it. A soft click. She slipped her hand free, stood, and felt along the wall for the breaker near the door. "Carl will bring the lamp," she said, the sentence reeling us both back to earth. But when she turned, very slowly, I rose too, moved by a reflex I hadn't known I still possessed. The air tightened like a string drawn to breaking, the dark, blurred edges leaving only what was absolute: breath, rain, heartbeats. Jakob. She said my name for the first time. One syllable, and it cut me clean from 2176 like a blade. "Miller," I answered. No rank, no distance. We stood very close, close enough that her warmth bled into mine, easing the damp chill through my shirt. No wall fell, no alarm sounded. Only a fragile, naked instant, old-fashioned as a film frame on the verge of burning white. I lowered my head, very slowly, slow enough that if she wanted, she could have turned away. She didn't. Our first kiss happened like a secret the rain had known all along. Not hurried, not hungry, just two human beings touching to prove they were still human. The taste of rain mingled with the cold iron of blood at the corner of my mouth. A tremor ran through me. Not fear, but the sense of a door somewhere inside swinging wide. A hinge squealed on the hallway. We broke apart at once, breath shattering into glass. The door banged. Carl stuck his head in with a guard, storm lamp in hand. "Generators back soon," he said. Sallow light swept the room, the crates, the wet floor, my hands clenched behind my back so they wouldn't shake. Miller had already put her calm back on like a uniform, jacket under her arm, notebook open, chin lifted with the quiet authority of someone used to command. "Back to work," she said, crisp. If Carl or the guard sensed the small storm that had just blown through this room, they ignored it. We went on, bracing crates, mopping puddles, counting tools, like nothing had happened. The rain softened, the ceiling bulb sputtered, then burned steady. When I pushed the door open and stood under the eave, watching the last drops fall in scattered beads on the concrete, I knew a border inside me had shifted for good, from surviving to living, from prisoner to person, from fear to something else, more dangerous, more fragile, and truer than anything since the day I was captured. That night, I wrote in the blue notebook, "We kissed in the dark." The world did not end. I folded the book, listening to Hearn settle into its after-storm hush. Somewhere, a thread of jazz drifted from the duty room radio, so faint it felt like memory. I closed my eyes and, for the first time, smiled to myself in the dark, knowing from here on we would have to learn how to love like people walking thin ice, one step at a time, silently, leaving no trace. And though I knew tomorrow would bring barbed wire, roll call, the cold eyes of the towers, I also knew this. In the dark of that storage room, a very small flame had been lit. People can cut the power. People can order silence, but they cannot order a heart to stop beating.